Hi, and welcome to the Human Side of Business podcast. I'm Ange, MacCabe, CEO and co-founder of Intuitive Performance. I'm a performance coach, HR professional, whole person leadership facilitator, and your host. The Human Side of Business podcast is fueled by the genuine curiosity to understand how personal characteristics and skills can be leveraged to drive individual and team performance, tangible outcomes, and ultimately organizational success within business. Each podcast is devoted to sharing knowledge, expanding our learning edges, and exploring the trends in corporate culture towards growing the emotional intelligence of organizations. I'm so glad you're here. Hi, and a warm welcome to the Elevate Business Podcast. Both myself, Ange MacCabe, and Scott Russ are your hosts. We have the pleasure of introducing you to Mike Cheng, who is the CEO and co-founder of Lumen 5. Mike started Lumen 5 with a vision to democratize video creation so that anyone can easily produce engaging video content without prior video editing experience. Lumen 5 has seen rapid growth in recent years and was featured on the Globe and Mail's 2021 list of top 100 fast-growing companies in Canada. Hi, Mike. We're so excited to have you here on the Elevate Business Podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me here.
Likewise. Great. So tell us, let's jump in a little bit about your role at Lumen 5 and your journey. We're excited to hear about it.
Yeah, Lumen 5 is certainly very different than where we were 5 years ago. Nowadays, we're about a 50-person company. We're working on a video creation platform that's now used by over 1 million users around the world. 5 years ago, it was 3 co-founders, myself and my 2 co-founders, who were thinking about, well, what's the next big thing? When building on new ideas, we often think about what's the next big wave, what's the next big trend. And at that time, we saw the intersection of a few very interesting trends. One being the ubiquitous nature of smartphones, the fact that we're all carrying these mini televisions, super power televisions in our pockets everywhere we go. And the other trend that we saw was the increasingly affordable mobile data, which unlocked the power of these televisions for the first time beyond just local processing to actually streaming information from the internet everywhere you go. Mm-hmm. And what that ended up being was you could watch high definition videos on the go, on the train, on the bus, anywhere that you want. The natural question popped into our heads, which is, if there's such supply for it, such demand for it, if there's such demand for it, where does the supply come from? Who's going to create these videos? And on the consumer side, that was relatively clear. A lot of apps like Snapchat at the time, and nowadays more TikTok, empowers the average consumer to produce video content, almost like a C2C entertaining video platform. But businesses that historically communicate with other businesses or with consumers, either through blog posts or white papers or whatnot, how are they going to adapt to this new world? And we were kind of inspired by what PowerPoint did for presentations back in the day. Mm-hmm. Even picturing now, how do you create a presentation without PowerPoint or some sort of PowerPoint equivalent? You know, is it a series of images that you string together, and would you use Photoshop? And so we pictured a tool that was accessible for the average office worker. And that's what Lumen 5 became. It's kind of this PowerPoint-esque. And even as you use the platform, much of the user experience is inspired by the simplicity and the linear nature of PowerPoint, so that people don't have to deal with timelines and layers and the complexity of professional video editing. And that was the value proposition that we brought to the world.
Amazing.
I love the intentionality behind that. And really, like, I imagine 3 co-founders kind of coming together and saying, hey, we're seeing this coming up, and this is what's happening in the world, and like, how can we kind of solve this problem, and coming to this conclusion. So how is that intentionality, I guess, kind of grown over the past 5 years or so since starting the organization to where you are today?
Yeah, I think there's probably parts of my education rubbing off on me. So I had studied to become a designer, and very much view problem solving through design thinking lens. Mm-hmm. And so problem solving is a big part of how I view the world of business, or even in my role. Even to today, I view my role fundamentally as solving either customer problems or organizational problems. How do we help us grow faster? What are some of those blockers? And then designing solutions, thinking about the stakeholders, thinking about the constraints of a design problem. And how that's grown over time is twofold. Number one, we have to increasingly deepen our solution. It's not enough to solve a problem at a surface level. That might be for a minimum viable product in the first 6 months or so. But 5 years into our operations, we have to continuously solve a bigger and bigger problem. Mm-hmm. And that's actually led us down very much the enterprise routes. 5 years ago, we were solving the problem for you work in the communications department, you show up to work, you're asked to produce some sort of video. Lumen 5 helps you create that one video. As we thought more deeply about the problem at an organizational level, it's headquarters at a Fortune 500 brand wants to get a message out there. They need to somehow get a message consistently at scale across their 40 different global teams. Their 40 different global teams operate in different regions, different time zones, different languages. And so Lumen 5 has become this platform that allows Fortune 500 brands to create videos with consistency. So we build constraints into the system so that when you show up to work and you create a video for your brand, the fonts are all set, the logo's all there. All the media is kind of pre-selected, so you can't really screw it up. You're just really there to do the finishing touches. Mm-hmm. And then the other side of that intentionality, I guess you can say, is adapting to the changing markets. Video 5 years ago is not what it is today. And some of those things that change are as platforms evolve. For example, Instagram stories wasn't really what it is today 5 years ago. And Instagram stories are these vertical videos. They're a time constraint. They disappear after 24 hours. And as our users are often the ones that are trying to keep up with what these big platforms are doing and supporting, we have to think about how do we support our users to create content for a changing environment as well. So that's been a fascinating journey.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Thank you for sharing that with us. And so I always correlate business with people, and that's just the way my brain works. So tell us a little bit more, Mike, with regards to the ever-changing environment and world that we're living in, as well as organizationally. What's your focus? What's your main focus for your team in 2022?
Yeah. As I mentioned earlier, my focus always bounces between the two things. One is customer. So understanding how the pandemic has affected our customers and how do we better shape our products and services for that. And then the other side is, of course, internally in the organization itself. So much like I would imagine many tech companies, we've had to go remote. 2020, 2019. I don't know. I don't know how long it's been. I always anchor to the name COVID-19 to remind myself what year it all started. So, we've had to do that. I think we in tech are very grateful that we can work remote, that a lot of the stuff is digital. But one of the first things that we learned was, despite having all of our productive work digital, all of the relationships that are built, all of the things that really makes a team, as opposed to just like a group of contractors coming together to solve a problem, is that in-person nature, that drawing on a whiteboard, the spontaneous interactions that happen as you pass by someone in the hall. And so all of that went away, and the organizational design became a little different. One of our first priorities at that time, and we still continue that to today, is how do we design spontaneous interactions? One thing that we saw really went missing was cross-department relationships. So how do we bring that back? People within teams, they meet at stand-ups, they meet at meetings, so they continue to have and foster those relationships. But if you work in a different department as someone, chances are you never run into them. You don't have a scheduled meeting. So in the very early stages, we were very experimental with lots of different platforms. One of the first things we did was roll out a virtual office in the like kind of 1 or 2 months into the pandemic. And what the virtual office was, you can log in and you're represented physically with an avatar within a kind of a digital space that you can navigate to different digital rooms. And the microphones are kind of proximity based. And so you can move your avatar close to someone, you can have that kind of conversation. We had digital rooms set up for lounge areas for people to take a break. And those were some of those ways that we tried to spark spontaneous interactions over time. And then over time, we kind of extended those experiments to introducing Discord. And Discord is a very popular voice communications platform in the gaming world, where and we look to the gaming world for inspiration on how to build organizations, because in the gaming world, people have built organic and spontaneous relationships digitally and remotely for a long time. And so there's some innovations there in the way they design Discord. And often people look at Discord and Slack and they go, oh, they're both messaging platforms that look so similar, but they're designed for different purposes. All the way through to nowadays, where we currently we're hosting this big internal competition on Draw Battle, and it's this charades like digital game. We have teams play against each other for prizes, and so the cross experimental or cross departmental interactions are still something that we are really mindful of. It's nothing quite replaces being in person together. But we also find that it's not so much that we'll find one solution that works. It's how do we introduce something new to keep the experience engaging and keep people coming back for more than just work.
The underlying kind of thing I've noticed, or the theme that's showing up for me there, is around connection. And so looking at ways in which teams and people within the organization can stay connected for those spontaneous conversations, or for those team building experiences and everything along those lines. Yeah.
That's, and you start to see that the lack of that connection or the weakening of that connection translate into the quality of ideas, translates into the speed at which we can solve problems or even deliver products. And we really start to see that the productive work that people put in, or the sheer hours that people put in, don't necessarily go away, but it's almost that you have to put in more hours to overcome the lack of smoothness and connection to be able to get the same message across in text form or on Zoom without the body language, without the whiteboards. And so it actually takes more work to get the same amount of work done. And that's how powerful we've learned that connections are.
That is powerful for sure. And so when it comes to your team's performance, what is it that you're focusing on, Mike, in the sense of ensuring that they're set up for success, knowing that and connectivity is, a root tenet essentially that you follow, and the effort that goes behind making that consistent?
I think performance has been more emphasized to be balanced with wellness, particularly over the past 2.5 years or so. Is that
makes sense.
So many people struggle in silence. Not everyone has adapted equally to a virtual world. Some people are naturally introverted. You tell them to stay home, and it's like, great, I'll be the same person. Some people really crave that in-person interaction. Some people choose their workplaces because they like the office, they like the people, and when you take that away, that can be a very distorting experience for them. And so, one thing we've really focused on is how do we ensure that wellness is a part of what we do? And previously, it was more so a personal responsibility. There's the company, you have time off, you have your vacation days, you do what you do with it. But as people stopped taking their vacation days, and that was one of the first signs that we saw, is if you can't fly anywhere, you can't go anywhere, people aren't taking as many vacations, people are more likely to work longer, with commute time being gone, with Slack being 24/7 on. People are more actively working for more hours of the day, sometimes to their own detriment, sometimes leading to burnouts. And so our performance management has been under this belief that it's people first. And if people are healthy and well, and they're feeling good about life and work, then the productivity is a byproduct of that wellness and not the other way around. And so from a performance management perspective, that's been taken into consideration in a more serious manner than we had previously. And so I would say that's been a unique challenge, is how do you maintain, because the question was more consistent performance. Well, consistent performance also requires consistent wellness across a team that's also being drained emotionally from the pandemic. So very early on, we saw the dangers of continuously pushing for productivity. And if we're not mindful of the wellness piece, we're making a long-term sacrifice that could lead to people leaving the company, or just people not being productive because they're no longer well as a person.
And how do you adjust your mindset? I'm getting excited about this, Scott. That's why I'm jumping in again. How do you adjust your mindset, Mike, with regards to going from that atypical leadership performance slash productivity? Like, how are we meeting our goals mindset into wellness first, productivity is the byproduct? Like how do you flip that switch?
Yeah, I find that a lot of founders tend to look for frameworks and processes. How do you implement change management? And that might be true for a much larger company. For a company like ours, 50 people, leading by example is the best way to run any kind of change management. And so it's not like we had a playbook for changing or flipping a switch. It's more so that you sit together in a room with your leaders and your managers and have that philosophical conversation, align and agree that this is a new way of work. These are new priorities. How are we going to lead by example? And so in a previous time, maybe if I were to take an early Friday off, I would just kind of do it. I don't like post it publicly or anything. But in a pandemic world, and we do encourage our managers to be more likely to share things like, hey, I'm going to go out for a walk. And it could be on 11 a.m. or 2 p.m. Hey, I'm going to go out for a walk, be back in 20 minutes. Encouraging more of that public display of I am taking care of myself, and so should you. And I think leading by example is it's kind of not new to the pandemic world. I think that was always an effective strategy, even pre-pandemic, but it was something that we had to demonstrate that, hey, we are taking our work life differently as leaders of the company. We're adapting by focusing on our wellness because we believe it's important that we persevere through these circumstances. Yep. And we found that when we do that, the team understands, okay, well, if our leaders are leading by example, then this is the cultural switch that is currently happening. And we found that empowers individuals to feel more comfortable taking breaks, taking care of themselves.
No, I think that's fantastic, Mike. And so I'm actually going to shift gears here a little bit, where I know you have experience kind of building companies, building teams, some of them being self-funded, others being venture-backed. I'd be curious from a leadership perspective, as you're growing your team, how do you make sure that your leadership team doesn't become like the bottleneck within an organization as you scale and grow?
Is that a question for me, Scott, or is that for
yeah. So, I mean, fascinating question. And I think bottlenecks are everywhere, and the leadership team will always be part of that bottleneck. And I think that's just the nature of the pursuit of a high growth company, is that you run into bottlenecks. I find that there's a couple things that really helps, particularly pertaining to the leadership team. One is external coaching. Just because actually, let me take a step back here. If you're a venture backed, you've got a board of investors, maybe they've got advisors lined up. VC firms tend to deliver value in that sense, ensuring their young and inexperienced founders have access to coaching and mentorship. That doesn't necessarily come at the cost of 20% of your company. There's lots of coaching and mentoring and networks out there. So I think particularly from a bootstrapping perspective, it's important to set aside resource for that, to operate with the acknowledgement that your competitors who are better funded are likely to have external coaching support. And so to stay on par and to ensure that your leadership continues to grow as well, be budgeting and setting aside the time and resource for that. The other thing that I think is from a funding perspective, a lot of times the bottleneck becomes a cash bottleneck, or that's the common misconception or conception. You go and raise $100 million, it kind of unlocks your bottleneck because you have a lot of money. I think in building lots of different types of financial status companies, I guess some venture backed, some not venture backed, not all problems. In fact, I'd say very little problems can be solved with money. I think particularly the problem that leadership teams can solve with money is one of scaling and doing more of the same thing. So you figured out something that works, this customer group, this product solution, and the next step is, okay, we just need to do this one thing so much faster. That is a classic problem that money can solve. And generally, I recommend that's the best time to raise money. You've really figured out product market fit. You have a really well-defined customer, really healthy unit economics. Your business becomes a machine where you put $1 in and $2 pop out. Great, go go fundraise. I think in the case of most other businesses and most other circumstances, leadership teams are not confined by cash. It's how do we find product market fit? How do we find the right customer? How do we tweak our unit economics? And the analogy I like to think about is driving on a highway that's straight. You want a lot of speed, but for many companies, you're driving on a windy road and you don't want speed. You need to be able to slow down. You need to be able to turn. And I've seen too many startups kind of accelerate themselves off a cliff, because that is what funding does. It's acceleration. And if you accelerate in the wrong direction, you create a momentum that makes it that much more difficult to course correct.
That's amazing insight, Mike. And Scott and I are kind of laughing and looking at each other because it resonates as we grow our organization, right? In the sense of how fast do you grow? How fast can you pivot? And when is the right decision to do so? I find it quite interesting, like from your seat, in the sense of identifying that you figure out something, do it really well, and then that's when you scale it. What was the defining moment that kind of allowed you to have that aha moment?
I think for us was in the early days, I'd say the first 6 to 9 months, there was a lot of toying around with minimum viable products. We're kind of sharing links to our product on forums and getting users here and there and trying it. And I think a couple months in, we saw returning users. And one of the best decisions we made, and I encourage all founders to explore, is to turn on pricing early. You don't ever truly know whether or not you're delivering value unless you ask people for money, because that is directly correlated with your value. I think we live in a time where companies like Instagram have normalized this idea of think about revenue later. And I think that's fine for many businesses, particularly in this consumer space where it's hard to charge the average person money for what we've begun to take for granted for free. But especially if you're building a business to business tool like we were, you have to tie pricing to your product. Otherwise, you'll never really know whether or not what you have is worth paying for. So that aha moment was we had this free user base and then we were at a bit of a crossroads. Do we continue down this free path and amass users? And we'd probably see much faster growth if we went down that path, and then hopefully, I guess, cross our fingers and hope to sell to a company that'll figure out monetization. But we had decided to take a different approach, which is turn on pricing, ask for money, and see if people were willing to pay. And that was the aha moment for us. Is very quickly people popped in their credit cards without any kind of friction, and that validated for us that there was something valuable there that at the time was at the very least worth $29 or $19 a month. And that aha moment allowed us and gave us the confidence to continue building in that direction. And it not only was it a aha moment conceptually for the idea itself, it also just gave us money. It gave us money to grow. It gave us a revenue stream that allows us to think about hiring and scaling and expanding.
Right. And reading between the lines there, Mike, I almost imagine that, if people weren't popping in their credit cards and weren't willing to pay for it, it is another aha moment, so to speak, as well, as saying, well, hey, maybe we're not as aligned as we think we are. And what do we have to do differently to allow users to actually be willing to put their credit card or actually pay for this type of service or product, and find that out earlier rather than waiting to continue trying to amass customers.
Yeah, that's right. I always find that many people are willing to use things for free or even try it once for free. It's a pretty low barrier. Once you throw a price in there, the bar is just higher. And I think if anyone is serious about building a team or building a business, the bar has to be high. The product and service has to be worth something. And I think you're absolutely right, Scott, which is that when we turned on pricing, the learnings were twofold. Who was willing to pay, and how do we do more of those things? Who wasn't willing to pay? And what do we need to do to capture all the people that weren't ready to give us their $19 at that time? And I'd say in many ways, that's how we've grown and scale, is taking those two learnings of the users who are successful. How do we do more of this thing? Of the users who are not successful, either canceling or refusing to upgrade, how do we then shape our product so that we can capture that audience? And it's similar to the enterprise topic that I brought up earlier is, we've got all these small businesses that were really more than willing to pay. Then enterprises come in and go, well, you're lacking this, you're lacking that, you're lacking these 12 things before we can even consider you. And so slowly, one by one, we've removed those blockers, and as a result, have opened up a new revenue stream for our business, which is the enterprise business.
Fantastic. Kudos to you. That's amazing. And so, as you learn and grow from a business perspective, how do you lend that mentality of problem solving, learning, and growing with your team members?
I think it's everything's kind of very much tied together. So it's not too different from my example earlier of leading by example. And it's publicly admitting mistakes, sharing learnings, no matter how big or small, building that culture of learning. Yeah. One thing that we've always spoken and taken very seriously from the beginning is if mistakes are punished in an organization and mistakes are seen as a bad thing, then you, as a result, kill innovation. Because you, by definition, innovation requires experimentation, and experimentation makes mistakes inevitable. So publicly sharing mistakes that are made with a focus on the learning. Here's what we learned. Making mistakes is a part of a natural process, and building that expectation into the culture creates a more experimentation type of culture. And so if an average team member has to choose between doing something that's safe but maybe low returns, or doing something that's risky, but there's a chance of something working out. If the leaders lead by example and we create an expectation that mistakes are not punished, then they're more likely to pursue the innovation. And I think that's so important for every startup, is that the day you stop innovating is the day you become an incumbent. And there's nothing wrong with becoming an incumbent, but you better have billions of dollars in the bank to be an incumbent.
There you go. No, we really appreciate your time here, Mike. And so I guess wrapping things up, we always like to ask our guests, what are 3 words of inspiration that you would want the world to hear?
Yeah, 3 words of inspiration. I think, I don't know if it's a word necessarily, but I always think back to this quote, if that'll be okay. It's just like, this too shall pass. And if you're, whether it's the pandemic, whether you lost a big customer, or you tried to raise money and it didn't work out, you just never can't, or Steve Jobs would say, you can't connect the dots looking forward. And I think I've been in the business long enough to know that it's a roller coaster ride. And if things are going really well, you can't let it get to your head, because that too shall pass. And if nothing is going well, then at the very least, you have nothing to lose. It kind of goes uphill from there. So I think if I had to kind of turn that quote into a word, is perseverance is one of those words. And a lot of times for entrepreneurs, founders, and leaders is, how do you stay resilient, and how do you build a team that's resilient enough to just win through survival? And lots of people crash and burn very brightly because they push too hard, and whether that's accelerating growth at the wrong time or pushing themselves too hard, leading to burnouts. I think that would be my advice to the world.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us, Mike, and joining us here today on the Elevate Business Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was fun.
Likewise. And for those who would like to learn more about Lumen 5, we're going to point a link on the company's profile on the Elevate Business Podcast title page. Take good care. Thanks for listening to the Human Side of Business podcast. I'm glad you could join us. If you enjoyed today's episode and want to stay updated with our latest content, make sure to visit our website. The link can be found in the episode description, where you can subscribe to the podcast, sign up for our newsletter, and learn more about our whole person leadership services. Sounds interesting? Explore the whole person leadership cohort by Intuity Performance, a unique program that offers unparalleled support to managers on every step of their leadership journey. Our program features evidence-based assessments, workbooks, group coaching, and interactive learning experiences to help you level up your leadership skills. Reach out today to apply to one of our upcoming cohorts. Until next time, take care and stay curious.